Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Book Club with Jared podcast. I am your host for the next 40 minutes or so, Jared, as I've said before. And I will be keeping you guys entertained with the book that we've been reading. I say have been reading, but we've only read it once. But you can understand what I'm talking about. I want to begin by giving you guys a little bit of food for thought. This podcast, as I said in the previous episode, has been something I've wanted to do for quite a while. It started with just an idea back when I was in college, and I was worried that somebody else would have this idea and take it and run with it before I had the chance to, and I was really worried about it. So my question to you guys is, have you ever had an idea that somebody stole before you could put it into action? And if so, how did that make you feel? Because if I had this idea and somebody got to it before I did, I would be a little bit disappointed. Not just with the person, I wouldn't really be disappointed with the person who actually took the idea, but I'd be disappointed with myself for taking so long to actually put it into action. So if you want to leave your response to that, you can put that in the comment section below. I'd like to see your guys' responses. I was pleasantly surprised with how many people actually tuned into the podcast and how many of you guys were actually interested and how many people turned up. I'm really thankful for that. I hope that I can keep you guys entertained well enough with my with my book reading skills and my beautiful speaking voice. I'm just kidding, but anyway, I'm thankful for everybody who's tuned in. Like I said last time, I want to establish a theme, and I know that asking a question isn't so much of a theme as it is part of the actual speaking, but that's what it's going to be today. I also have a glass of sparkling water, so if you hear me take periodic sips throughout the podcast, you know what it is. Okay, so when we left off on Monday, what day is today? Today's Wednesday. I've gotten all my days messed up this week. When we left off on Monday, we were just beginning chapter 3 of the Alex Rider book, Stormbreaker. And if you remember, we were learning about how Alex's uncle died in a car accident, or so he was told by the police, and he's trying to investigate what actually happened because he doesn't believe it. And as we've come to learn, that's actually not what happened. It appears that his uncle was actually shot while still in his car, but nonetheless, it wasn't what he was told. So we read 2 chapters last time. It was pages 1 through 26. So I think we will read chapters 3 and 4 today, and then next time we will read 5 and 6 and so on. I think that with this particular book, we will do it in 2 chapter segments, like 2 chapters at a time. I know I previously said 3, but 3 chapters will take way too long. But anyway, so we will get started with chapter 3. It is titled Royal and General. The bank called the following day. This is John Crawley. Do you remember me? Personal manager at the Royal and General. We were wondering if you could come in. Come in? Alex was half dressed, already late for school. This afternoon, we found some papers of your uncle's. We need to talk to you about your own position. Was there something faintly threatening in the man's voice? What time this afternoon? Alex asked. Could you manage 4:30? We're on Liverpool Street. We can send a cab. I'll be there, Alex said, and I'll take the tube. He hung up. If anybody doesn't know, the tube refers to the subway system in England. He hung up. Who was that? Jack called out of the kitchen. She was cooking breakfast for the two of them, although how long she could remain with Alex was a growing worry. Her wages hadn't been paid. She had only her own money to buy food and pay for the running of the house. Worse still, her visa was about to expire. Soon, she wouldn't even be allowed to stay in the country. That was the bank. Alex came into the room, wearing his spare uniform. He hadn't told her what had happened at the junkyard. Jack had enough on her mind. "I'm going there this afternoon," he said. "Do you want me to come?" "No, I'll be fine." He came out of Liverpool Street Tube Station just after 4:15 that afternoon, still wearing his school clothes. A dark blue jacket, gray trousers, striped tie. He found the bank easily enough. The Royal and General occupied a tall, antique-looking building with a Union Jack fluttering from a pole about 15 floors up. There was a brass plaque with the name next to the main door and a security camera swiveling slowly over the pavement. Alex stopped in front of it. For a moment, he wondered if he was making a mistake going in. If the bank had been responsible in some way for Ian Ryder's death. It was always possible that they had asked him here to arrange his own. But why would anyone from the bank want to kill him? He didn't even have an account there. He went inside. And in an office on the 17th floor, the image on the television monitor flickered and changed as street camera 1 smoothly cut across to reception cameras 2 and 3. Everything was dark and shadowy inside. A man sitting behind a desk saw Alex come in and pressed a button. Camera 2 zoomed in until Alex's face filled the screen. "So he came," the chairman of the bank muttered. "That's the boy?" The speaker was a middle-aged woman. She had a strange potato-shaped head, and her black hair looked as if it had been cut using a pair of blunt scissors in an upturned bowl. Her eyes were almost as black as her hair. She was dressed in a severe gray suit and was sucking a peppermint. "Are you sure about this, Alan?" Alan Blunt nodded. "Oh yes, quite sure. You know what to do?" The last question was addressed to his driver, who was also in the room. The driver was standing uncomfortably, slightly hunched over. His face was a chalky white. He had been like that ever since he had tried to stop Alex in the auto junkyard. "Yes, sir," he said. "Then do it," Blunt said. His eyes never left the screen. In the lobby, Alex had asked for John Crawley and was sitting on a leather sofa, vaguely wondering why so few people were going in or out. The reception area was quiet and claustrophobic, with a brown marble floor, 3 elevators to one side, and above the desk, a row of clocks showing the time in every major world city. But it could have been the entrance to anywhere. A hospital, a concert hall, even a cruise liner. The place had no identity of its own. One of the elevators slid open and Crawley appeared in the same suit he had worn at the funeral, but with a different tie. "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting, Alex," he said. "Have you come straight from school?" Alex stood up but said nothing, allowing his uniform to answer the man's question. "Let's go up to my office," Crawley said. He gestured. "We'll take the elevator." Alex didn't notice the 4th camera inside the elevator, but then it was concealed on the other side of the one-way mirror that covered the black wall. Nor did he see the thermal intensifier next to the camera. Sorry, I'm stuttering a little bit. But this second machine looked both at him and through him as he stood there, turning him to a pulsating mass of different colors, none of which translated into the cold steel of a hidden gun or knife. In less than the time it took for Alex to blink, the machine had passed its information down to a computer that had instantly evaluated and then sent its own signal back to the circuits that controlled the elevator. "It's okay, he's unarmed. Continue to the 15th floor." "Here we are." Crawley smiled and ushered Alex into a long corridor with an uncarpeted wooden floor and modern lighting. A series of doors were punctuated by brightly colored abstract paintings. "My office is just along here." Crawley pointed the way. They had passed 3 doors when Alex stopped. Each door had a nameplate, and this one he knew. 1504, Ian Ryder. White letters on black plastic. Crawley nodded sadly. "Yes, this is where your uncle worked." He'll be much missed. Can I go inside? Alex asked. Crawley seemed surprised. Why do you want to do that? I'd be interested to see where he looked. I'm sorry, Crawley sighed. The door will have been locked, and I don't have the key. Another time, perhaps. He gestured again. He used his hands like a magician, as if he were about to produce a fan of cards. I have the office next door, just here. They went into 1505. It was a large square room with 3 windows looking out over the station. There was a flutter of red and blue outside, and Alex remembered the flag he had seen. The flagpole was right next to the office. Inside, there was a desk and a chair, a couple of sofas, in the corner a fridge, on the wall, a couple of prints. A boring executive's office. Perfect for a boring executive. Please, Alex, sit down, Crawley said. He went over to the fridge. Can I get you a drink? Do you have Coke? Yes. Crawley opened a can and filled a glass, then handed it to Alex. Ice? No thanks. Alex took a sip. It wasn't Coke. It wasn't even Pepsi. He recognized the oversweet, slightly cloying taste of supermarket soda and wished he'd asked for water. What do you want to talk to me about? Your uncle's will. The telephone rang, and with another hand sign, this one for excuse me, Crawley answered it. He spoke for a few moments, then hung up again. I'm very sorry, Alex. I have to go back down to the lobby. Do you mind? Go ahead. Alex settled himself on the sofa. I'll be about 5 minutes, and with a final nod of apology, Crawley left. Alex waited a few seconds. Then he poured the cola into a potted plant and stood up. He went over to the door and back into the corridor. At the far end, a woman carrying a bunch of papers appeared and disappeared through a door. There was no sign of Crawley. Quickly, Alex moved back to the door of 1504 and tried the handle, but Crawley had been telling the truth. It was locked. Alex went back into Crawley's office. He would have given anything to spend a few minutes alone in Ian Ryder's office. Somebody thought the dead man's work was important enough to keep it hidden from him. They had broken into his house and cleaned out everything they'd found in the office there. Perhaps the office next door might tell him why. What exactly was Ian Ryder involved in? And was it the reason he had been killed? The flag fluttered again, and seeing it, Alex went over to the window. The pole jutted out of the building exactly halfway between rooms 1504 and 1505. If he could somehow reach it, he should be able to jump onto the ledge that ran along the side of the building outside room 1504. Of course, he was 15 floors up. If he jumped and missed, there would be a couple of 100 feet to fall. It was a stupid idea. It wasn't even worth thinking about. Alex opened the window and climbed out. It was better not to think about it at all. He would just do it. After all, if this was the ground floor or a jungle gym at the schoolyard, it would be child's play. It was only the sheer brick walls stretching down to the pavement, the cars and buses moving like toys so far below, and the blast of the wind against his face that made it terrifying. Don't think about it, just do it. Alex lowered himself onto the ledge outside Crawley's office. His hands were behind him, clutching onto the windowsill. He took a deep breath and jumped. A camera in the office across the road caught Alex as he launched himself into space. 2 floors above, Alan Blunt was still sitting in front of the screen. He chuckled. It was a humorless sound. I told you, he said. The boy's extraordinary. The boy's quite mad, the woman retorted. Well, maybe that's what we need. You're just going to sit here and watch him kill himself? I'm going to sit here and hope that he survives. Alex had miscalculated the jump. He had missed the flagpole by an inch and would have plunged down to the pavement if his hands hadn't caught hold of the Union Jack itself. He was hanging now with his feet in midair. Slowly, with huge effort, he pulled himself up, his fingers hooking into the material. Somehow, he managed to climb back onto the flagpole. He still didn't look down. He just hoped that no passerby looked up. It was easier after that. He squatted on the pole and then threw himself sideways and across to the ledge outside Ian Ryder's office. He had to be careful. Too far to the left and he would crash into the side of the building, but too far the other way and he would fall. In fact, he landed perfectly, grabbing hold of the ledge with both hands and then pulling himself up until he was level with the window. It was only now that he wondered if the window would be locked. If so, he'd just have to go back. It wasn't. Alex slid the window open and hoisted himself into the second office, which was in many ways a carbon copy of the first. It had the same furniture, the same carpet, even a similar painting on the wall. He went over to the desk and sat down. The first thing he saw was a photograph of himself, taken the summer before the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe, where he had gone diving. There was a second picture tucked into the corner of the frame. Alex, aged 5 or 6, he was a little surprised and saddened by the photographs. Ian Ryder had been more sentimental than he had pretended to be. Alex glanced at his watch. About 3 minutes had passed since Crawley had left the office, and he had said he would be back in 5. If he was going to find anything here, he had to find it quickly. He pulled open a drawer on the desk. It contained 4 or 5 thick files. Alex took them and opened them. He saw at once that they had nothing to do with banking. The first was marked Nerve Poisons, New Methods of Concealment and Dissemination. Alex put it aside and looked at the second. Assassinations, 4 case studies. Growing ever more puzzled, he quickly filed through the rest of the files, which covered counterterrorism, the movement of uranium across Europe, and interrogation techniques. The last file was simply labeled Stormbreaker. Alex was about to read it when the door suddenly opened and 2 men walked in. One of them was Crawley. The other was the driver from the junkyard. Alex knew that there was no point in trying to explain what he was doing. He was sitting behind the desk with the Stormbreaker file open in his hands, but at the same time, he realized that the 2 men weren't surprised to see him there. From the way that they had come into the room, they had expected to find him. "This isn't a bank," Alex said. "Who are you? Was my uncle working for you? Did you kill him?" "So many questions," Crawley muttered, "but I'm afraid we're not authorized to give you those answers." The second man lifted his hand, and Alex saw that he was holding a gun. He stood up behind the desk, holding the file as if to protect himself. "No," he began. The man fired. There was no explosion. The gun spat at Alex, and he felt something slam into his heart. His hand opened, and the files tumbled to the ground. Then his legs buckled, the room twisted, and he fell back into nothing. That's the end of chapter 3. Wow. We read 11 pages. So, in this chapter, we obviously saw that Alex went to the bank, or so he was led to believe it was, and he had a meeting with the chairman, whose name is Crawley. They had a little bit of a chit-chat, and then Crawley had to leave and go back down to the lobby. Then Alex noticed that next door to Crawley's office was where his uncle used to work. And so what Alex did was he climbed out the window and he went over to he crawled out on the flagpole, actually. And he almost fell, but he grabbed a hold of the flag that was on it that happened to be a Union Jack. And he was able to hoist himself up and jump onto the ledge outside of the adjacent office and pull himself in. So that's basically where we are, and we've just learned that the bank isn't actually a bank, and it's basically what it is. Seems like Ian Ryder was involved in some sketchy stuff, and we're about to find out what that is because we just reached the end of the chapter. And chapter 4 is called So What Do You Say? Alex opened his eyes. So he was still alive. That was a nice surprise. He was lying on a bed in a large, comfortable room. The bed was modern, but the room was old with beams running across the ceiling, a stone fireplace, and narrow windows in an ornate wooden frame. He had seen rooms like this in books when he was studying Shakespeare. He would have said the building was Elizabethan. It had to be somewhere in the country. There was no sound of traffic. Outside, he could see trees. Someone had undressed him. His school uniform was gone. Instead, he was wearing loose pajamas, silk from the feel of them. From the light outside, he would have guessed it was mid-morning. He found his watch lying on a bedside table, and he reached out for it. The time was 12 o'clock. It had been around 4:30 when he had been shot with what must have been a drugged dart. He had lost a whole night and half a day. There was a bathroom leading off from the bedroom, bright white tiles and a huge shower behind a cylinder glass and chrome. Alex stripped off the pajamas and stood for 5 minutes under a jet of steaming water. He felt better after that. He went back into the bedroom and opened the closet. Someone had been to his house in Chelsea. All his clothes were here, neatly hung up. He wondered what Crawley had told Jack. Presumably, he would have made up some story to explain Alex's sudden disappearance. He took out a pair of Gap combat trousers, Nike sweatshirt and sneakers, got dressed, then sat on the bed and waited. About 15 minutes later, there was a knock and the door opened. A young Asian woman in a nurse's uniform came in, beaming. "Oh, you're awake and dressed. How are you feeling? Not too groggy, I hope. Please, come this way. Mr. Blunt is expecting you for lunch." Alex hadn't spoken a word to her. He followed her out of the room, along a corridor and down a flight of stairs. The house was indeed Elizabethan, with wooden panels along the corridors, ornate chandeliers, and oil paintings of old bearded men in tunics and ruffs. The stairs led down into a tall galleried room with a rug spread out over flagstones and a fireplace big enough to park a car in. A long polished wooden table had been set for 3. Alan Blunt and a dark, rather masculine woman sucking a peppermint were already sitting down. "Mrs. Blunt?" "Alex." Blunt smiled briefly, as if it were something he didn't enjoy doing. It's good of you to join us." Alex sat down. "You didn't give me a lot of a choice." "Yes, I don't quite know what Crawley was thinking of having you shot like that, but I suppose it was the easiest way. May I introduce my colleague, Miss Jones?" Of course it would be Miss Jones. The woman nodded at Alex, her eyes seeming to examine him minutely, but she said nothing. "Who are you?" Alex asked. "What do you want with me? I'm sure you have a great deal many questions, but first, let's eat." Blunt must have pressed a hidden button, or else he was being overheard, for at that precise moment, a door opened and a waiter in a white jacket and black trousers appeared, carrying 3 plates. "I hope you like meat," Blunt continued. "Today, it's..." Whoa, that's a French word. It's some fancy word I can't pronounce, and I'm not even going to try. "You mean roast lamb." Okay, so it's French for roast lamb. The chef is French. Alex waited until the food had been served. Blunt and Miss Jones both drank red wine. He stuck to water. Finally, Blunt began. "As I'm sure you've gathered," he said, "the Royal in general is not a bank. In fact, it doesn't exist. It's nothing more than a cover, and it follows, of course, that your uncle had nothing to do with banking. He worked for me. My name, as I told you at the funeral, is Blunt. I'm the chief executive of the Special Operations Division of MI6, and your uncle was, for want of a better word, a spy." Alex couldn't help smiling. "You mean, like James Bond?" "Similar, although we don't go in for numbers. 00 and all the rest of it. Your uncle was a field agent, highly trained and very courageous. He successfully completed assignments in Iran, Washington, Hong Kong, and Havana, to name but a few. I imagine this must come as a bit of a shock for you." Alex thought about the dead man, what he had known of him, his privacy, his long absences abroad, and the times he had come home injured. A bandaged arm one time, a bruised face another. Little accidents, Alex had been told, but now it all made sense. "I'm not shocked," he said. Blunt cut a neat slice off his meat. Man. Ian Ryder's luck ran out on his last mission. He went on. He had been working undercover here in England, in Cornwall, and was driving back to London to make a report when he was killed. You saw his car at the yard. "Stryker and Son," Alex muttered. "Who are they?" "Just people we use. We have budget restraints. We have to contract some of our work out. We hired them to clean things up. Miss Jones here is our head of operations. It was she who gave your uncle his last assignment." "We're very sorry to have lost him, Alex." The woman spoke for the first time. She didn't sound very sorry at all. "Do you know who killed him?" "Yes." "Are you going to tell me?" "No, not now." "Why not?" "Because you don't need to know. Not at this stage." "All right." Alex considered what he did know. My uncle was a spy. Thanks to you, he's dead. I found out too much, so you knocked me out and brought me here. Where am I, by the way? This is one of our training centers, Miss Jones said. You've brought me here because you don't want me to tell anyone what I know. Is that what this is all about? Because if it is, I'll sign the Official Secrets Act or whatever it is you want me to do, but then I'd like to go home. This is all crazy anyway, and I've had enough. I'm out of here. Blunt coughed quietly. It's not quite as easy as that, he said. Why not? It's certainly true that you did draw attention to yourself, both at the junkyard and then at our offices on Liverpool Street. And it's also true that what you know and what I'm about to tell you must go on no further. But the fact of the matter is, Alex, that we need your help. My help? Yes, he paused. What have you heard of a man called Herod Sale? Herod Sale. Alex thought for a moment. I've seen his name in the newspapers. He's got something to do with computers, and he owns racehorses. Doesn't he come from somewhere in Egypt? Yes, from Cairo. Blunt took a sip of wine. Let me tell you his story, Alex. I'm sure you'll find it of interest. Harold Sale was born in the complete poverty in the back streets of Cairo. His father was a failed oral hygienist. His mother took in washing. He had 9 brothers and 4 sisters, all living together in 3 small rooms along with the family goat. Young Herod never went to school, and he should have ended up unemployed, unable to read and write, like the rest of them. But when he was 7, something occurred that changed his life. He was walking down Fez Street in the middle of Cairo when he happened to see an upright piano fall out of a 14th-story window. Apparently, it was being moved and it somehow overturned. Anyway, there were a couple of English tourists walking along the pavement underneath, and they would have both been crushed, no doubt about it. Except at the last minute, Herod threw himself at them and pushed them out of the way. The piano missed them only by an inch. Of course, the tourists were enormously grateful to the young Egyptian waif. Waif? I don't know that word. Okay, next episode I'm gonna have a dictionary so I can look up words I don't know. That's a good idea. And now it turned out that they were very rich. They made inquiries about him and discovered how poor he was. The very clothes he was wearing had been passed down by all 9 of his brothers. And so, out of gratitude, they more or less adopted him, flew him out of Cairo and put him into a school over here, where he made astonishing progress. He got excellent exam results, and here's the amazing coincidence. At the age of 15, he actually found himself sitting next to a boy who would grow up to become the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Our present Prime Minister, in fact. The 2 of them were at school together. I'll move quickly forward. After school, Sale went on to Cambridge, where he got a degree in economics. He then set out on a career that went from success to success. His own radio station, computer software, and yes, he even found time to buy a string of racehorses, although I believe they seldom win. But what drew him to our attention was his most recent invention, a quite revolutionary computer that he calls the Stormbreaker. Stormbreaker. Alex remembered the file he had found in Ian Ryder's office. Things were beginning to come together. The Stormbreaker is being manufactured by Sale Enterprises, Mrs. Jones said. There's been a lot of talk about the design. It has a black keyboard and black casing, with a lightning bolt going down the side, Alex said. He'd seen the picture of it in PC Review. It doesn't only look different, Blunt cut in. It's based on a completely new technology. It uses something called the round processor. I don't suppose that will mean anything to you. It's an integrated circuit on a sphere of silicon about 1 millimeter in diameter, Alex said. It's 90% cheaper to produce than an ordinary chip because the whole thing is sealed in, so you don't need clean rooms for production. Oh, yes, Blunt coughed. I'm surprised you know so much about it. It must be my age, Alex said. Well, Blunt continued, the point is, later today, Sale Enterprises are going to make a quite remarkable announcement. They're planning to give away tens of thousands of these computers. In fact, it's their intention to ensure that every secondary school in England gets its own Stormbreaker. It's an unparalleled act of generosity, Sale's way of thanking the country that gave him a home. So the man's a hero. So it would seem. He wrote to the Downing Street a few months ago. My dear Prime Minister, you may remember me from our school days together. For almost 40 years I've lived in England and I wish to make a gesture, something that will never be forgotten, to express my true feelings toward your country. The letter went on to describe the gift and was signed, yours humbly, by the man himself. Of course, the whole government was excited. The computers are being assembled at the Sale plant down in Port Talon, Cornwall. They'll be shipped across the country at the end of this month, and on April 1st, there's to be a special ceremony at the Science Museum in London. The Prime Minister is going to press that button that will bring all the computers online. The whole lot of them. And, this is top secret by the way, Mr. Sale is to be rewarded with British citizenship, which is something he has apparently always wanted. Well, I'm very happy for him, Alex said, but you still haven't told me what this has got to do with me. Blunt glanced at Miss Jones, who had finished her meal while he was talking. She unwrapped another peppermint and took over. For some time now, this department, Special Operations, has been concerned about Mr. Sale. The fact of the matter is, we've been wondering if he isn't too good to be true. I won't go into all of the details, Alex, but we've been looking at his business dealings. He has contacts in China and the former Soviet Union, countries that have never been our friends. The government may think he's a saint, but there's a ruthless side to him too. And the security arrangements down at Port Talon worry us. He's more or less formed his own private army. He's acting as if he's got something to hide. Not that anyone will listen to us, Blunt muttered. Exactly. The government's too keen on their hands. The government's too keen to get their hands on these computers to listen to us. That was why we decided to send our own man down to the plant, supposedly to check on security. But, in fact, his job was to keep an eye on Herod Sale. You're talking about my uncle, Alex said. Ian Ryder had told him that he was going on an insurance convention. Another lie in a life that had been nothing but lies. Yes, he was there for 3 weeks, and, like us, he didn't exactly take to Mr. Sale. In his first reports, he described him as short-tempered and unpleasant. But at the same time, he had to admit that everything seemed to be fine. Production was on schedule, the Stormbreakers were coming off the line, and everyone seemed to be happy. But then we got a message. Ryder couldn't say very much because it was on an open line, but he told us that something had happened. He said he'd discovered something, that the Stormbreakers mustn't leave the plant and that he was coming to London at once. He left Port Talon at 4 o'clock. He never even got to the freeway. He was ambushed in a quiet country lane. The local police found the car. We arranged for it to be brought up here. Alex sat in silence. He could imagine it. A twisting lane with the trees just in blossom. The silver BMW gleaming as it raced past, and around a corner, a second car waiting. Why are you telling me all this? He asked. It proves what we were saying, Blunt replied. We have our doubts about Sale, so we send a man down, our best man. He finds out something and he ends up dead. Maybe Ryder discovered the truth. But I don't understand, Alex interrupted. Sale's giving away the computers. He's not making any money off of them. In return, he's getting a medal and British citizenship. Fine. What's he got to hide? We don't know, Blunt said. We just don't know. But we want to find out. And soon, before these computers leave the plant. They're being shipped out on March 31st. That's today. That's okay. They're being shipped out on March 31st, Ms. Jones added. Only 3 weeks from now. She glanced at Blunt. He nodded. That's why it's essential for us to send someone else to Port Talon. Someone to examine where your uncle left off. Alex smiled queasily. I hope you're not looking at me. We can't just send in another agent, Mrs. Jones said. The enemy has shown his hand. He's killed Ryder. He'll be expecting a replacement. Somehow we have to trick him. We have to send someone in who won't be noticed, Blunt continued. Someone who can look around and report back without being seen. We were considering sending down a woman. She might be able to slip in as a cleaner or a kitchen helper, but then I had a better idea. A few months ago, one of these computer magazines ran a competition. Be the first boy or girl to use the Stormbreaker. Travel to Port Talon and meet Harold Sale himself. I keep saying Harold, but it's Herod. That was the first prize, and it was won by some young chap who's apparently a bit of a whiz kid when it comes to computers. The name of Felix Lester, 14 years old, the same age as yourself. He looks a bit like you too. He's expected out in Port Talon in 2 weeks from now. Wait a minute. You've already shown yourself to be extraordinarily brave and resourceful, Blunt said. First at the junkyard. That was a karate kick, wasn't it? How long have you been learning karate? Alex didn't answer, so Blunt went on. And then there was that little test we arranged for you at the bank. Any boy who would climb out of a 15th floor window just to satisfy his own curiosity has to be rather special, and it seems to me that you are rather special indeed. What we're suggesting is that you come and work for us, Ms. Jones said. We have enough time to give you some basic training, not that you'll probably need it, and we can equip you with a few items that may help you with what we have in mind. Then we'll arrange for you to take the place of this other boy. We'll pack him off to Florida or somewhere. Give him a holiday as a consolation prize. You'll go to Sale Enterprises on March 29th. That's when the Lester boy is expected. You'll stay there until April 1st, which is the day of the ceremony. The timing couldn't be better. You'll be able to meet Herod Sale, keep an eye on him, tell us what you think. Perhaps you'll also find out what it is that your uncle discovered and why he had to die for it. You shouldn't be in any danger. After all, who would suspect a 14-year-old boy of being a spy? All we're asking you to do is to report back to us, Blunt said. April 1st is just 3 weeks from now. That's all we're asking. 3 weeks of your time. A chance to make sure these computers are everything they're cracked up to be. A chance to serve your country. Blunt had finished his lunch. His plate was completely clean, as if there had never been any food on it at all. He put down his knife and fork, laying them precisely side by side. All right, Alex, he said. So what do you say? There was a long pause. Alex put down his own knife and fork. He hadn't eaten anything. Blunt was watching him with polite interest. Ms. Jones was unwrapping yet another peppermint, her black eyes seemingly fixed on the twist of the paper in her hands. No, Alex said. I'm sorry? It's a dumb idea. I don't want to be a spy. I want to play soccer. Anyway, I have a life of my own. He found it difficult to choose the right words. The whole thing was so preposterous he almost wanted to laugh. Why don't you ask this Felix Lester to snoop around for you? We don't believe he'd be as resourceful as you, Blunt said. He's probably better at computer games, Alex shook his head. I'm sorry, I'm just not interested. I don't want to get involved. That's a pity, Blunt said. His tone of voice hadn't changed, but there was a heavy, dead quality to the words. And there was something different about him. Throughout the meal, he had been polite, not friendly, but at least human. In an instant, that had disappeared. Alex thought of a toilet chain being pulled. The human part of it had just been flushed away. We'd better move on then to discuss your future, he continued. Like it or not, Alex, the Royal and General is now your legal guardian. I thought you said the Royal and General didn't exist. Blunt ignored him. Ian Ryder has, of course, left the house and all of his money to you. However, he left it in trust until you were 21, and we control that trust. So there will, I'm afraid, have to be some changes. The American girl who lives with you, Jack? Miss Starbright. Her visa has expired. She'll be returned to America. We propose to put the house on the market. Unfortunately, you have no relatives who would be prepared to look after you. So I'm afraid that also means you'll have to leave Brooklyn. You'll be sent to an institution. There's one I know just outside Birmingham, the St. Elizabeth in Stourbridge. Not a very pleasant place, but I'm afraid there's no alternative. You're blackmailing me, Alex exclaimed. Not at all. But if I agreed to do what you asked? Blunt glanced at Miss Jones. Help us, and we'll help you, he said. She said. Alex considered, but not for very long. He had no choice, and he knew it. Not when these people controlled his money, his present life, his entire future. You talked about training, he said. Miss Jones nodded. Felix Lester is expected at Port Talon in 2 weeks, she said. That doesn't give us very much time, but it's also why we brought you here, Alex. This is a training center. If you agree to what we want, we can start at once. Start at once. Alex spoke the 3 words without liking the sound of them. Blunt and Miss Jones were waiting for his answer. He sighed. Yeah, all right. It doesn't look like I've got very much choice. He glanced at the slices of he glanced at the slices of old lamb on his plate. Dead meat. Suddenly he knew how it felt. And that was the end of chapter 4. So I like chapter 4. It was interesting. It was, in recap, Alex woke up in this training institution and he had a long conversation with Alan Blunt and Mrs. Blunt. And they're asking Alex to be a spy for them, to take up his uncle's mantle, I guess you could call it, and spy on this guy who is creating supercomputers, or so that's what it sounds like. They're afraid that whatever he's creating is too good to be true, and they want Alex to investigate and see why his uncle had to be murdered for it. So that's where we are at the moment. Despite saying that it wasn't blackmail, they were definitely blackmailing him, telling him that if he didn't do as they asked, they would ship Jack off to back to America, and they would send him to a boarding school in Birmingham. Obviously, he didn't want to do that, so he agreed to work for them. So that's where we left off, and we will resume chapter 5 on the next episode, which is titled 00 Nothing, which is probably going to be a pretty good chapter. But anyways, that's where we're going to leave off. I, again, want to express how thankful I am for everybody sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed the episode. If you have any recommendations, once again, just feel free to leave them in the comments. Anything I could do better, anything that you guys enjoyed, anything that, I could cut out or improve on. I'm trying to work on my pronunciation of words and my reading fluency. I know that might have been a little bit rough on this episode, but I'm going to try and work on that. Next episode, I'm going to have a dictionary so that I can look up words that I don't understand, because that's a little bit embarrassing. But besides the point, I'm, again, really glad that you guys stuck around, and I will see you on the next episode. Have a great night, guys.